Chapter 1. Drowning. In the dark void that is the ocean at night, a storm churns the darkness into a treacherous nightmare. Dense clouds full of repossessed water surge across the sky, dropping continuous deluges of rain back into the sea. The ocean rages against the pelting rain, turning tumultuous waves into thrashing mountains of water. The element that above and below chose for this battle could not be more alike, and yet their frenzy could not be resolved with kinsmanship. As the sky and sea battled against each other, an innocent vessel is caught in the crossfire. Torrents of water slam down onto the deck in heavy sheets, as if to challenge the slamming waves that toss the vessel to and fro. The boat full of mortals had become a toy for the elements to see who could flood the vessel first. Treacherous waters pouring across every inch of wood, soaking the boat to its core in dreaded weight. A gigantic wave, more powerful than a volcano, rises from the ocean's surface, threatening to cut through the clouds. The storm responds to this attack with a secret weapon, a flash of light that carves through the void of night like a jagged blade in the darkness. Lightning smashes through the wave, carving through the wave as it explodes into an electrified spray. The ocean turns back, struck deep by this attack, and turning its horizontal surface vertical upon this meager man-made contraption. The ocean claims the boat, as the passengers aboard it are unable to do anything, caught at the complete mercy of this battle. Thunder roars in protest, urging the vessel to rise to the surface. They are trapped inside, unable to be claimed by the depths. Figures rush to and fro. Those religious or desperate enough call out to different deities, pleading for safety. Their voices are swept away by the vicious, moist air, unable to be even reached by their own ears. And yet, not unheard, for their fate was not to end here. A victim to a grudge match between the horizon and heavens. Though the night is as dark and cold as the lifeless waters, lightning shatters in the background. A light that passes through the abyss for less than a moment, allowing the men to observe their surroundings. Thunderous splintering arrives moments later, rousing the crewmen back to life as they struggle to remember where they are, that this was not a nightmare that they could wake up from, but a cruel reality that they needed to fight through in order to survive. The storm wields its lightning with fervor, holding the ocean accountable for its passengers. Waves continue to splash up on either side of the ship as heavy rain falls down. But as the water continues to approach, they almost seem to work in tandem as the waves grip the ship to stop its swing as the rain holds the deck flat. The clouds rumble, displeased with this development, and chastise the ocean for allowing such simple matter to interrupt their duel. The ocean claps its waves in response, snapping back at the sky for its intolerable nature. The clouds glow with energy again, warning the waves to watch their tone. The ocean rumbles. They were done playing submissive. If the sky was going to play dirty, the depths had a secret weapon too. A new cry echoes across the waves as a massive limb reaches up and grasps the bow of the ship. Crew that had fallen overboard had neither the air nor the strength to yell in fear nor warning to their friends. Those still on board were either scrambling over wreckage or drowning in the decks below. It was the ship itself that groaned in protest as the large crustacean hugged the hull tightly. The sound of splintering wood can be heard beneath the waves as the ship itself is wrestled for its contents. The figurehead is strangled by a gigantic barnacled claw while the body of the beast scuttles underneath the ship, stabbing into the hull for footholds. The mandibles crack open the keel of the ship, draining the crew and their cargo into the mouth of the beast. The clouds murmur overhead, appalled by what they see. The ocean churns violently, daring the sky to intervene. The rain clouds continue to pour, mulling over the thought of a counterattack, but fearing the fate of the seamen. The clouds crackle with anger, as if gritting teeth in disgust, unable to do anything. The ocean bubbles smugly, claiming the lives of the ship as a slight against the sky. The sound of ancient metal being unsheathed penetrates the noise. The echo of a magical blade reverberates across the horizon and back again to the wielder as they place their second hand upon the hilt. In a mystical flash, faster than even the lightning, the unholy blade carves through the horror of this scene, rending the beast of its hold on the ship. The figurehead of the ship rejoices with an involuntary creak as a severed claw falls lifelessly into the unforgiving waters that it rose from. The ship nearly leaps from the waves in joy as the beast lapses its death grip on the ship. For the first time in eons, the monster knows pain. It recoils in primordial fear, regurgitating its meal as it cries in pain, expelling bodies and shrapnel back into the corpse of the ship. Water floods into cracks and holes caused by the benthic attacker, causing survivors to panic and crawl to higher ground. The ship is pushed beneath the waves as the monster crawls atop the vessel in order to approach its attacker. Crewmen soaked in various fluids from salt-based to carnivorous bile struggle to climb upwards. Most that manage to get their heads above deck quickly retreat as they catch a glimpse of the creature, but a few remain as they have become entranced by the monster-slaying blade and its wielder. A solitary figure stands at the bow of the ship, turning from where they had severed the grasp of the sea creature, their form shrouded in darkness, standing firm amidst the blistering rain. Their average clothes and build is accented only by their long, silk white hair flowing in the storm and the magical weapon that they wield. The blade, a beautiful iridescent pearl, appears luminescent. It neither glows in the dark nor reflects the light, gleaming neutrally in the watery scene, as if its ghostly material was something beyond the physical world. The figure stands unfazed, feeling no fear or remorse for what is happening. Neither the tragedy of the ship nor the creature that has crawled up onto the stern garners a reaction. As torrents of water berate every inch of their body, they simply brandish their sword towards the foe. The giant crab charges, scuttling across the boat with a crash as it slams onto the deck and backhands the mast out of its way. Streaks of water race along the fuller of the blade like a rushing river as the figure raises the sword high, tossing the water upwards before careening the edge down upon the infected carapace. The shell crumples inward, like a sand castle as the body of the beast slams into the deck. Before the invertebrate could recover, the sword slashes once more, this time upwards, flashing against the night like lightning itself. The beautiful weapon pierces through the cephalothorax, penetrating straight past the eyes and into the mind of the creature, before it can even perceive the wielder. There was silence for a moment. There was no applause or cheers of thanks. Those that watched were beyond words or actions. Even the waves and thunder remained silent in awe of this display. But this figure was not interested in praise or acknowledgement. This was not an act of righteousness or selflessness. This was merely a job, work to be dealt with, and now their chore was completed. The figure slowly withdraws their sword, the entrails remaining within the corpse, as if even the gore knew that it was unworthy to cling to such a blade. All eyes watched the creature slowly slide into the water, allowing the boat to heave in relief and resurface. As the figure turns away from her work, suddenly a massive claw clamps around them. The instinctual grasp of the dead creature grips onto the body of their killer and drags her into the ocean with them. She didn't even have a second to cry out in pain as the claw crushed her ribs, pulling her off of the deck of the ship and battering her body against the debris. Even after she was dragged beneath the waves, there was no exclamations of anguish or fear to be drowned in the water. The girl was certainly unhappy, but not out of fear. This was annoyance. The figure strained against the dead man's grip that held her. She battered its shell with her bare feet. Her long, flowing hair trailed behind her as the corpse weighed her down. Her emerald eyes burned with fury at the gall that this monster had for causing her strife, like a mere insect that bites at the finger of their exterminator. She plants her hands down onto the claw, pushing with all of her might to break free from its grip. It takes a moment and a significant amount of exertion, before the claw shatters. Carapace and sinew fly outwards in all directions. Rather than swiping away the gore and pursuing an escape, she maintains her attention on the monster. Instead of fleeing to the surface or gasping for air, she instead feels more comfortable in the water and remains irritated at her prey's insolence. She neither kicks her feet or waves her arms, instead simply flying through the water with her mind as she pursues the plummeting corpse. Her silver sword flies into her open hand as the water responds to her command and returns what is rightfully hers. She glides through the water towards the massive creature. Cracking the shell, she slams into it. Her sword flashes in the water like lightning as she stabs in and out, spraying chum into the water. She rages at the creature, gripping viscera and tossing entrails until she tires, her temper fading. As she lets the remains fall to the ocean floor below, she quiets her soul and allows herself a moment to calm down. Her eyes roll into the back of her head as she seethes, floating in the water, spent after her outburst. The ocean growls at her. She opens her eyes, glancing about her. Staring at her in the murky depths is a huge reptilian face. A massive snake-like head looms in the darkness, much larger than any ship she's ever seen. Its scales are chunks of deep green rock. Its nostrils, two huge slits that couldn't even use a sail as a handkerchief. Its massive eyes are as wide and golden as the sunrise. Had it intervened, it could have stopped the entire conflict in a moment with a single bite of its gargantuan maw. And yet, it simply stares. Its presence is unsettling, its existence terrifying, but its inaction is even more ominous. Skadi glares back unflinchingly at the beast. Her face drains of emotion, and all the fight she had in her body melts away into the dark waters. But she is not afraid. Its unholy gaze is unwavering, judgmental even, and Skadi returns in kind with disgruntled annoyance. After several long moments of disdainful looks, the massive head cranes upwards and begins rushing towards the water surface. Skadi kicks off, forcing the water downward as she flies upwards. Exploding out of the water, she sails towards a rocky outcropping, a bleak existence of rock in the middle of nowhere. The cold black texture is caused by ages of algae and viscera, staining it with a permanent slick surface. Not even wreckage was able to cling to the unforgiving surface. No mortal can meet such rocks at sea and expect to survive, but this girl was no mortal. Skadi lands atop the whetstone with dexterous experience. With an arrogant flourish of her hand, she summons the magical power of the ocean that flowed through her veins and simply discards the water soaked into her clothes back into the sea. She takes a moment to wipe the hair out of her face before pivoting on her heel to glare back at the massive sea serpent. The gigantic beast towers over her. Despite its size, it moves gracefully through the water, causing barely any turbulence or waves as it moves. The massive amounts of water it displaces with every movement barely registers against the ocean's surface. In moments, its skin is also clear as the water trickles down the back of its head into the sea from whence it came. Its gaze was still fixed upon Skadi in a disapproving scowl. "Are you going to say anything, or are you just going to keep looking at me like I'm rotting meat?" Skadi exclaims. She takes several steps backwards along the bank before spinning and looking away. She squats down near the water, swiping another hair from her face. "Your mother never wanted us to argue while in the water," the sea serpent says. Its voice was deep, unfathomably so. There was no grating though, no guttural roar or earth-trembling bass. It was as if this cataclysmic creature was whispering. "How's that working out for you?" Skadi asks. It wasn't much of a comeback. There were countless other things she wanted to retort, but she was frazzled. Never felt good to be judged by a creature of supreme intelligence and power. This was especially true for a parent to criticize their child. "You know that I cannot summon my full form to this plane of existence, let alone raise it above the water," he scolds. "Yeah," Skadi says with a sigh. "You're both inside and outside at the same time. She waves her hand wildly as she plants herself into the ground in a huff. The sea creature furrows its brow, which is quite the sight to see. Imagine an entire hill suddenly wobbling at its peak and caving inward. I am all-encompassing, he reiterates. It is my duty as the Ouroboros to guard the borders of reality and keep everything contained. I liked it better when you kept your tail in your mouth, Skadi mumbles. It was that kind of mumble where you attempt to say it quietly so that the other person doesn't hear, but just loud enough that they might because you secretly want them to hear. Needless to say, this was said about an omnipresent entity that very much heard what she said, no matter the inflection. That was before I was given my second duty as Nidhogg, he explains. With matters as it is, there is much work to do. With the Pantheon still recovering, they delegated the task to me, as they viewed my previous task as simple enough to continue with more work. That was more than a millennia ago, Skadi points out. Haven't they found someone to take care of stuff like that? The sea serpent's face turns solemn. That's why the training and delegating of demigods such as yourself are so important, he reminds her. You're bigger than the universe, and you're being delegated as a gardener, Skadi blurts out. The word delegated was said with such malice it made the humongous creature recoil. Skadi takes several long seconds to catch her breath before pulling her long white hair over her shoulder to stroke it. We all have our duties, the sea serpent says slowly. You're Jormungandr, the world serpent, Skadi whispers. She looks up at the towering creature. But to me, you're my dad. His face softens, and he lowers his head down towards her. If the sun had been in a different spot in the sky, she might have been shrouded in darkness. You still have much to learn, he says. She lowers her head, clutching onto her ponytail. It was the only thing that she had to remember her mother by. She remembered being held by a woman with warm arms and cool hair. Skadi could use a hug right now, but she knew she could never receive that kind of affection from her father. I thought I did a good job, Skadi mutters, trying to hold back tears. Serving mortals means more than simply felling beasts. I took care of their problem, while leaving them with several more to deal with. Are we supposed to solve all of the issues of the mortals? Skadi accuses. I thought gods weren't supposed to intervene. She was standing now, defiantly yelling at the creature before her. She clenches her hands and jaw tightly. If she closed herself off any more, he knew he would lose her for good. You are not a god, he explains. Not yet. Skadi closes her eyes, trying to find a way to breathe in order to make another comeback. How convenient, she says. She turns away from him, crossing her arms. You have a duty to the people of these realms, he continues. You are capable of many things. Because of the powers you possess, you have to act in a way that condones the safety and preservation of life. Not all life, she mutters. You must learn responsibility, he instructs. Skadi could feel a headache growing. It was time for another lesson. Without a word, he simply turns away from her, lowering his massive form into the ocean. Skadi always dreaded this part. Despite being born of the goddess of the sea, or so she had been told, the ocean depths always unsettled her. Nevertheless, she followed her father, taking several long strides through the surf before stooping down to duck below the water's surface. The deep green water rushed around her as she sank beneath the waves. With the last gentle push from the rock, she was free-floating in the water. The ocean surrounded her on all sides, the brilliant emerald liquid glowing with potent energy as waves cast dancing shadows on the sea floor below. The massive form of her father was more prevalent now. The gigantic slithering form was more of a dark-scaled wall to her left side, with the entire ocean open to her right. To most people, sharing the waters with such a large serpent would be terrifying, but to Skadi, It was her only sense of comfort. The only time Skadi got to experience the closeness with her father was when they swam together like this. Lately, the only time she got to see him was when he had something important to say, such as her next task or painful criticism. Far ahead, his head turns back to look at her, and she feels the need to pick up her pace. Without skipping a beat, she draws in the water around herself, wrapping herself in a warm current that propels her forward. She had learned to control water at a very young age. The currents responded to her call, and swimming through the sea was as easy as walking on land. Still, she never felt like she belonged. Diving into these deep waters made her feel like a fish out of water, or, more accurately, a human in water. Her fear of the water was uncalled for, she knew. It was an irrational fear, something she couldn't control or overcome. Perhaps if her mother had been here to help her learn about the ocean growing up, but Skadi's mother was missing. She had disappeared shortly after giving birth to Skadi, who was raised solely by a giant monster that appeared less and less in her life. There was a time when he would allow her to ride him by grabbing onto his scales or perching atop his brow. Before that, he would cradle her in his maw. When the journey was too long and scary for her, he would close his jaws around her in a protective darkness that she knew nothing could penetrate. It was reassurance like that she lacked as she grew up. She was coddled less and disciplined more. She wondered if her mother would be as harsh and controlling, but it didn't matter. She wasn't here. Skadi struggled to keep her composure, but thinking about all of these things was making it difficult for her to focus. Normally, she could hold her breath for a long time, long enough to trick her father into believing she was capable of breathing while in the sea. This charade was bound to be found out eventually, but today was not a good day for more scolding. Skadi closed her eyes and willed herself to calm down, to feel the massive embrace of the ocean and take a deep breath of the ocean waters. She sucked in cold air that stung her nose with salt and filled her lungs. She tried to breathe, but she couldn't. She was drowning. She coughed and gagged in a panic. She tries to call out to the water, to no avail. Without a second's hesitation, she wills herself towards the surface. It was as if she willed the entire ocean down instead of herself up. And if she had been paying attention, she might have learned a valuable lesson about perspective. Breaching the water's surface, she coughs up water, expelling it from her lungs, at first with guttural gasps, but then with magic as she controls the water to evacuate her system and draw in fresh air. The massive head of her father rises from the waves, and he is greatly displeased. She struggles for a moment to regain her breath. All the while, he simply glares at her. "You know what? I can't breathe water," Skadi sputters. The statement was made with far more venom than she had anticipated. It was bad enough she was being belittled for almost dying, but her father had a special kind of disrespect with his judgment. "If you are inexperienced with your skills, that is one thing," Jormungandr begins. "But lying about it, to me, is another thing entirely." His point was valid, but that's what pissed her off even more. He only saw things as plain statements of fact and never considered the heart of the matter. He only approached things logically, when her problems were more spiritual. "Oh, so now it's fine that I'm not perfect," Skadi blurts out, splashing the water in frustration. She was calm enough to tread water, but not calm enough to will the water out of her hair. It clung to her face, covering her vision, no doubt making her look more like a helpless child in his eyes. "You were never required to achieve perfection," he says. "No, I had to be better," Skadi seethes. "Whenever I work super hard to be enough, to do the right thing, it's passable. The second I make the slightest mistake is when things are unacceptable." She could feel her face burning, and she realized she was losing this argument. He waits a moment to make sure her outburst is done before speaking. "We can always improve," he points out. Without another word, he lowers himself back into the water. Skadi wanted to cry, to scream, to do anything to break this cycle. She was sick and tired of being frustrated of this terrible situation she was in, but there was no point in fighting it. She sighs, allowing herself to fall limp as she sunk beneath the waves, before turning and following once more.